Community of Practice is a dynamic platform for sharing, learning, and networking between parliaments, parliamentary organizations, donors, and other engaged stakeholders. Currently, our community includes over 600 participants from over 100 countries in the world, and it keeps growing, and we hope that will continue. Between 2021 and now, we have organized 6 public discussions on important topics in parliamentary strengthening. These have included peer-to-peer parliamentary strengthening, public engagement in the work of parliaments, the role of legislatures in leveraging transparency to counter foreign illiberal influences, advancing parliamentary accountability in crisis contexts, mapping and connecting parliamentary research services around the world, and gender-responsive budgeting and the role of parliaments. And each of these events has fostered a rich discussion. The participation for each event has had common threads and also new people joining us, people with specific interest in particular areas, such as, for example, the research service community of practice meeting really brought a lot of people together from different research services in parliaments around the world. Today, we are meeting to discuss measuring parliament's effectiveness within democracy. And this event has been co-organized in cooperation with colleagues from International Ideas Democracy Assessment Unit. And we are very grateful for all the work that Seema, who is going to be playing a key role during the session, and her colleagues have played in putting together such an interesting program. The workshop is going to be introduced with opening comments from Giovanni Rizzoni, who is head of the Parliamentary Support and Capacity Building Unit of the Italian Chamber of Deputies. Giovanni is author of the recently published book, Parliamentarism and Encyclopedism, Parliamentary Democracy in an Age of Fragmentation, which very much focuses on the role of Parliament in transforming information, in transforming data, if you like, into knowledge in the process of political decision-making. The introduction will set the stage for the workshop, which is organized in 2 parts. In the first part, international idea experts from International Ideas Democracy Assessment Team will present 2 essential tools for understanding and monitoring countries' democratic performance. First, the Global State of Democracy, GSoD indices, and second, the Democracy Tracker. The DA team will expose and explain the tools, and there will also be a practice lab in which you, the participants, will have the chance to engage hands-on with the tools to see how they work and can be used within Parliament. In the second part of the workshop, we will discuss the fundamental roles of Parliament in democratic governance and how these roles are currently incorporated within overall measures of democratic performance. We're going to ask what opportunities exist for enhancing the measurement of parliamentary performance with the goals both of providing better performance data for parliaments and their interlocutors, and ensuring that parliamentary performance is adequately reflected in overall democracy indicators. I am delighted now to pass the floor to Giovanni Rizzoni, who is going to make introductory comments for our workshop. Giovanni.
Thank you very much, dear Jonathan, for this introduction. And I thank you very much for this invitation for this short address on the importance of knowledge for parliaments. Normally, we tend to see parliaments as political institutions, that is, institutions in which the confrontation between the majority and the opposition takes place, in which a confrontation with the government, in which political debate among the different political groups is held. But we tend to neglect the fact that the parliaments are also producers of knowledge. They not only incorporate the knowledge and information from outside, but they produce new knowledge. And this is my first point. On the one hand, they offer raw data on their activity, and most of them have adopted a policy of open data, that is to offer structured and freely accessible data on their activity. But on the other hand, they cook this data into knowledge. They cook information into knowledge. What do I mean for this? I mean that they organize, distill, and systematize information, political information, allowing the understanding and the interpretation of information. Only through this process, information becomes knowledge, that is, becomes politically meaningful. How does it happen? For instance, the standing committees. The standing committees can be seen as a cognitive system that is able to digest any subjects, any kind of subject, any kind of topic. The political groups, they offer a cognitive map of politics. Politics would be very difficult to understand without having a parliament that represents the whole political spectrum. So really, parliaments are producers of political knowledge at the benefit of the whole political community. And they do this work through their architecture, not only the physical architecture. We know that the physical architecture is very important, also it influences the functioning of parliament and the functioning of the political system. Take the difference between the shape of the British parliament compared to that of the continental parliaments that are based on the hemicycle instead of the two rows of benches like in the UK. But I think that also the immaterial cognitive architecture of parliament is very important. That is the way in which they organize political knowledge. And I maintain that there is an encyclopedic calling in this structuring. That is, that parliaments tend to organize political knowledge according to circular and encompassing structures, like, for instance, again, the standing committees, the political groups, and so on. But also using storing knowledge. For instance, the importance of the parliamentary libraries as great repositories of political and cultural knowledge at the benefit not only of parliaments, but of the citizens. And I think that this encyclopedic calling is not only linked to the tradition of parliaments, but is really contemporary. Take the case of the advent of the internet. The advent of the internet for parliaments offered the opportunity and practically obliged parliament to set up the parliamentary websites. Parliamentary websites forced the parliaments to organize their implicit knowledge. And they are really the contemporary great encyclopedias of parliamentary knowledge and parliamentary information. Well, but you can object to me, well, very few people comparatively visit parliamentary websites, because today we get information mainly through the search engines like Google, or through the new AI tools like ChatGPT. Yes, this is true. And it's true also that these tools really represent a challenge to any encyclopedic organization of knowledge like that offered traditionally by parliaments. But they operate, these tools, like black boxes that operate on a statistical combination of patterns emerging from the analysis of huge amounts of data. So they are like oracles, to which we ask a question and we get the response, like the oracles of the ancient Roman or Greek age. And we can oppose these oracles to the architects of knowledge, like the parliaments. But I think that even ChatGPT, and this is my concluding remark, can provide reliable response only accessing the high quality data and high quality and verified data offered by parliaments. Even the responses given by ChatGPT could not be reliable without accessing the data, the structured data, the open data offered by parliaments. So I think that the encyclopedic endeavor of parliaments as architects of political knowledge will be necessary even in the future, and maybe even more than in the past, given the high fragmentation of political pluralism and also of knowledge of contemporary democracy. And I'm confident that the oracular capacity of AI tools or application will not replace, but will supplement and support also the new parliament.
I think Giovanni is frozen just before the end of his presentation.
Exactly. I was thinking it was me, but I think I'm here. Maybe we can give Giovanni a second or so to come back. If it doesn't work, well, at least he mentioned that he's at the end of his speech, so I think unfortunately we might have lost Giovanni, but the good news is that we will have a chance to hear from Giovanni and Jonathan during the second session of the workshop. Giovanni, can you hear us? And now, Giovanni, can you hear us? Okay. So I guess we will have to make this complicated decision and to go forward with the event and invite us all to the first session. As I said, we'll hear from Giovanni during the second session, so we'll have an opportunity to talk a bit more about his concept. And now I would like everyone to invite to the first session. It is a session where we will look at the international ideas, resources, assessing the state of democracy, GSoD, Indices and Democracy Tracker, as tools that are available for parliamentary actors to use in informing policy and actions. Giovanni, I think you're back, so just to quickly...
Yes, something...
yeah.
I hope that you hugged me, because the line was lost all of a sudden.
Online life comes with challenges, as well as ChatGPT as a resource to use. But as I mentioned, we will have the opportunity to hear from you in the second session, so we hope that we can learn more. And now I would like to pass the floor to Alexander Hudson, Senior Advisor from the Democracy Assessment Unit at the International IDEA in Stockholm. Alex?
Well, thank you very much. to our colleagues in InterPARES for organizing this, and to all of these participants from around the world. This is a wonderful opportunity for us. So I have a lot of things to say and about 10 or 12 minutes in which to say them. So I'm going to go very quickly, but we will have time for questions and answers after Atsuko's presentation, and then also in the practical explorations of these tools to follow. So please write down any questions you have, and we'll be happy to answer them as we go on. So the Global State of Democracy Initiative is something that we work on here at International IDEA in Stockholm, and it has a few aspects. Let's see if I can advance my slides. So we have the Global State of Democracy Indices, which is this annual quantitative data, the Democracy Tracker, which is qualitative reports updated on a monthly basis. We also do locally led assessments in the State of Democracy Assessments, our annual report, and some partnerships. And I'm going to talk about the first of these, the GSoD indices, and then Atsuko will talk about the Democracy Tracker. So we begin with the conceptual framework and methodology that we use in the GSoD indices. And if we want to measure democracy, which is indeed the purpose of the Global State of Democracy indices, then we first have to say something about what democracy is or how we understand that. And that international idea, we have a very broad understanding of democracy oriented around two defining principles, which are popular control of decision-making and decision-makers, and equality between citizens in the exercise of that control. So there are many different institutional forms that could realize those two principles. And we want to keep as open a mind as possible about the ways that democracy might look in different parts of the world and not prescribe any particular approach. And so then when we come to measuring democracy, we measure these what you might call top-level categories of democratic performance, which are representation, rights, the rule of law, and participation. And each of those has within it a number of factors and sub-factors to which we aggregate up to this category level. But note that we do not aggregate upwards to a single value for democracy for any country. We want to measure at this slightly lower level of these categories, representation, rights, rule of law, and participation, rather than giving a singular score for any country. Because, of course, the different countries may have different strengths and weaknesses, and we need to understand those well. So how do we measure democratic performance with those different concepts? And the answer is that we aggregate a whole lot of data. We have 24 different data sources. These are existing data sources from various organizations. We do a small amount of original data collection in the team in Stockholm, but most of the data comes from these existing data sets. And some of these are observational data from UN agencies. Some are academic projects of various sizes. Most notably, the Varieties of Democracy data set, which supplies about half of our indicators. And in terms of coverage, we have 174 countries in total, covering the years 1975 to 2023. And the most recent version of the data will cover 2024 in the next one, which will come out in June of 2025. And across the concepts that we showed you, there are 30 different indices. Now, don't worry about reading any of the text on this slide. The point is just to show you the shape of things. So we have the individual indicators are right around the outside, and then moving towards the center, democracy. And I'll just walk through that quickly with you. If PowerPoint would respond. I'm sorry. It has completely, oh, there we go. So we have at the lowest level, a individual input variable, as we call it. This one is CSO repression, which comes from Varieties of Democracy dataset. We aggregate that with 10 other indicators of freedom of association and assembly into one score for freedom of association and assembly, the lowest level of aggregation for us. We put that together with the other factors of civil liberties to get a civil liberties score. And civil liberties is one of the factors of a category we call rights. So we've aggregated a number of different factors together to give you a rights score. So we could tell you what the level of rights protection is in Sweden in 2023. And all of this and the various other sort of bubbles I haven't discussed are giving us an indication of the quality of democracy in that country. But again, we're not aggregating to a single score for democracy. Rather, we find these different levels of aggregation for specific concepts to be more useful. We can zoom in for a second here. Just to make the point that when you have 11 things that you want to turn into one, there are a number of different approaches you could use. You could just take the simple arithmetic mean, but we actually use a couple of sophisticated mathematical models, either Bayesian factor analysis or item response theory models, that allow us to take into account the differences in the quality or informative nature of the input variables and weight the ones that predict the others in a higher level. And we could talk more about that, but I'm going to move on for now to the more substantively interesting things. Just to rehearse the whole process here, there is something, the state of the world, right? There is the level of democracy in Sweden or in Zambia or in Mongolia in 2023. We learn about that through expert coders or observational data, which are then supplying the source data sets. We go collect the source data sets, identify the input variables, and then when we begin aggregating them upwards, taking those 11 indicators of freedom of association and assembly and getting one score for the subfactor, putting that together with the other subfactors to get the factor score and the category scores that we've discussed. And in the end, we have these 30 different aggregated indices of democratic performance. So just quickly, some advantages of this particular data set. There are many choices for data, of course, about democratic performance. One thing that we think is important is this comprehensive theoretical framework. So we've done the work of breaking down the different aspects of democracy, the ways that democracy is realized in different countries around the world, and described these concepts and put different indicators together from different sources to measure them. We think that we have a policy appropriate level of aggregation. So it's not all that often that someone needs to know exactly the level of CSO repression, but knowing something about the level of freedom of association and assembly or the level of rights is often quite useful. The data then are also derived from multiple high quality data sources. We've done quite a lot of work to understand where the best data might come from and put those together. We also have complete methodological transparency. So there are very long documents on our website that will tell you exactly how we've done all these things, the reason we've made the choices we've made, and you can replicate the data set for yourself, all those aggregation steps. And then as we'll explore together in a few minutes, we have some simple interactive online tools that enable you to use the data without worrying too much about computer code and things like that. And just in the few minutes I have remaining, I want to show you a few insights from the data. This is a graph from our most recent Global State of Democracy report. And it shows you a story that you know well, that in the 1990s, there was a great deal of progress towards democracy, with many more countries advancing than declining in the world for those years. And then in the last decade or so, the situation has changed, and there have been more countries declining than making progress. There's another way to look at that, and this is an intentionally messy graph, but each of those colored lines is one country's overall average level of performance over the last 40-some years. And then that thick black line in the middle is the global average. And what you'll see is that things have been fairly muted when you look at a global average, but that there was a peak in about 2012. 2012 was, as far as we can determine, basically the highest level of global democratic performance that we've achieved. And there has been a slight decline from 2012 to 2023. But the point I'd like to make here is that we remain relatively close to that all-time high. So while there is a lot of decline and declines we should be concerned about, we are not reverting back to 1975 or anything like that. In terms of where the areas of progress and decline are, you can see here the area of each of these squares represents the number of countries we're covering. The gray area is countries with no change. Red area is the countries with declines, and blue, the countries with advances. And you can see that in most of these indices, there are far more countries with declines than advances. This is particularly notable for us in freedom of expression, credible elections, economic equality. You'll see effective parliament second or third from the right on the top row, with more countries declining than advancing. We can look at how this differs across regions, and a few things stand out. Credible elections in Africa is an area of particular weakness and concern, also effective parliament and elected government in Africa. In Europe, access to justice is an area where we have a lot of negative trends. And then over in Asia and the Pacific, effective parliament, access to justice, and civil liberties, all areas of concern. When we look at regional averages for a few of these different indicators, you can see that the differences between regions are relatively stable, but that there is a significant decline, as we've noted in previous slides, with credible elections and effective parliament in Africa. And if you look at the Americas and Europe, we have this very gradual decline. A couple of indicators where we're particularly interested and concerned with many more countries now declining than advancing: credible elections, effective parliament, and free political parties. And we can look at how the different levels of performance are around the world. Just one simple tile map, which may be hard to look at first, but we have in the top left North America, and in the bottom right Oceania, Africa in the center at the bottom. Each tile, of course, represents a country. The reason to do this is that smaller countries appear much more readily in a map like this, such as Cabo Verde appears much better here than in a normal map. And you can see that the countries in yellow perform very well, those in sort of orange and pink in a mid-level, and in purple at a relatively low level. And so you can see that countries such as Costa Rica, Chile, stand out as performing well in the Americas, Sweden and Germany in Europe, Ghana, Malawi, Kenya, and South Africa, somewhat better in Africa. But there are many interesting insights we could derive from this. And finally, this is just an example of the kind of graph that you can make on the Global State of Democracy Indices website. So just by ticking a few boxes in our website, you can download graphs just like this, do many more interesting things, and we'll explore that together in a few moments. Thanks very much.
Alex, thank you very much for a super insightful presentation and for keeping the time. I would like to also remind our participants that there will be a short Q&A session at the end of the session, but you're very much welcome to put your questions in chat once you have those. And I will now gladly pass the floor to Atsuko Hirakawa, Democracy Tracker Coordinator from International IDEA, and Atsuko will present the Democracy Tracker. We can see the slides.
Okay. Thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you again for this opportunity to introduce one of International IDEA's newest tools, the Democracy Tracker. So in the next 10 minutes, I'd like to provide an overview of the tool, highlighting its key features and the data collection process. And I will then take you to the website and walk you through the main features. The Democracy Tracker is your go-to site for a holistic and timely picture of the state of democracy in any of the 173 countries we cover. We provide this picture by presenting monthly event reports that tell you how a particular event impacts specific aspects of democracy in any of the countries we cover, giving you an indication of the direction of democratization that month. The reports are also contextualized on individual country pages, which provide you with the socio-political background and annual scores you need in order to understand the development. You might ask why we developed this tool in the first place. After all, we're not short of democracy analysis. There are several organizations which provide cutting-edge annual updates on democracy already. And many, including International IDEA, package those insights into annual reports. But what we heard, especially when the pandemic hit, was that policymakers wanted more real-time information in order to make critical public health decisions that had real impacts on democracy. So we listened and responded with the Democracy Tracker. The tool is close to real time, providing monthly event reports. It is specific as it tells you what particular aspects of democracy is impacted and how it's impacted. And it does this at a country level, allowing you to drill down into the local dynamics. It also provides cross-country analysis through our biannual regional pages and the alert system that allows you to stay up to date on the countries and regions on topics that you're interested in. One of the clearest value adds we are contributing through this tool is our assessment based on a clear definition of democracy and an accompanying conceptual framework, which Alex explained to you earlier when he referred to the 30 different indices of aggregated democratic performance. The Democracy Tracker has proven useful to a range of actors so far. The tool is made for and feeds policy decisions, diplomatic briefing notes, media reports, strategic planning and evaluation, as well as a wide variety of research needs. I just listed the key stakeholders that we have been engaging through the Democracy Tracker. You will see that they include multilateral organizations, national parliaments, government agencies, and civil society organizations. Let's look a little more closely at the key features of the tool. The first feature is the monthly event reports, which tell you about particular events and their potential impact on democracy and human rights. They consist of a description of the event in question, a two-tier coding system that lets you know what specific aspects of democracy are affected, color-coded to indicate a positive, neutral, or negative impact. The sources we use to report this event and associated keywords, which can be used for research in other ways. You can also click here to remind yourself of the conceptual framework of democracy, so the coding makes sense as you read the reports. The second feature is the background information, which includes a 500 brief narrative, including the history and cleavages that drive politics today, global ranking per category of democratic performance from the most recent dataset, which helps put the monthly reports in context, and basic information on facts on political institutions and the ratification status of human rights treaties. The third and final feature are the categories and factors of democracy performance based on the annually updated GSoD indices data, which will enable you to see a change over time since 1975. Here you are seeing the trend lines for each of the 4 categories of democracy. You can also see how performance changes over time by using the scroll bar to pick the time period you are interested in. The spider web graphs shown here visualize how the 17 factors and sub-factors of democracy have changed over time. You can change the year on the slider bar, see the changes. The Democracy Tracker also presents specific events that are tagged with special flags, and they include developing stories which report as events to watch, red flagged events which are uniquely damaging to democracy or human rights, and they may include incidents such as political assassination and coup d'etats. We also routinely report on national elections. These are factual and descriptive. We don't make an assessment, but we provide data, for example, on the voter turnout or the percentage of seats won by candidates or parties, and also the percentage of women being elected. And we include information from election observation reports. In addition, there is a searchable archive on the tool where all the reports are stored and where you can do tailored research through all these filters, and you can export these results into Excel format. So how do we do the research and the reporting? The data collection involves a comprehensive monthly collection of news reports and expert reports from each of the countries we cover. We use two main data sources. First, the LexisNexis News Desk, which is a subscription-based media monitoring product, and Rebuilds, which scrapes thousands of news sites for content. We use tailored, specialized searches in these to receive the relevant reports. They allow us to cover not just news reports, but also expert publications, including from UN agencies and NGOs. And we supplement this sometimes by interviewing ideas field-based experts and local external experts also. We have a set of guiding questions we use for each decision-making point, including on whether to report an event, and then how we code it. First, is the event related to our conceptual framework? And if yes, which aspect or aspects? Second, does the event impact the status quo of democracy in that country? And third, what is the degree of the impact? Finally, I would like to highlight that the Democracy Tracker is not a newsfeed, so it's not where you will go to get the latest updates on all political events, but it's a tool that focuses on events that could change the status quo, and that's where we see our value. We believe that along with the indices, the Democracy Tracker allows you to understand democracy holistically and to have up-to-date knowledge on developments impacting the wide and core aspects of democracy in the countries of most importance to you. So through these, we believe that the tools can contribute to making informed policy decisions and actions for strengthening democracy in the countries and or thematic areas you consider as priority. So this is basically the overview of the Democracy Tracker. If you don't have the time to read the reports every month, I welcome you to sign up for one of our tools. One is the monthly newsletter, which is a digest of our monthly analysis, and our alerts, where you can customize your the reports that you want to receive based on countries, regions, or themes. And we're now going to navigate to the website. I don't know, maybe you have just a few minutes just to quickly show you the features. But because we have the practice lab after this, where you will be testing both of these tools, I would like to, in the meantime, think about the cases or scenarios based on what could be useful for your own work. Could be based on themes or a country where you are working on. While I'll take you to the website. So let's move to the website itself. Can you see the website?
Yeah, we can.
Okay, thank you. So this is the Democracy Tracker landing page, and it provides a visual overview of the latest analysis we have done. It's from the month of September, and each of these hexagons represent countries where we have made reports. The green hexagons indicate that the assessment we made on the report on a specific aspect of democracy was positive, whereas the red hexagons represent that the assessment was negative. You can click on any of these hexagons to go to the report itself to read more. We also provide critical events from each of the regions we cover every month, which you can also click to read about. And you will see all of the 173 countries represented in hexagons here we cover. And again, you can click on any of these hexagons. I just want to quickly show you one of the country profile pages. So let's say, for example, through your work, you are preparing for a mission to Zambia in a possible collaboration on areas under democratic governance. I know it's very broad, but you want to have an overview of the state of democracy in Zambia. So then you can first go to the Zambia country profile page. Here is where you will find the 500 narrative that gives you an overview, but also the key drivers of politics today. You can quickly find out that Zambia performs in the mid-range in all of the 4 categories of democracy. It is stronger in the area of participation and relatively weaker in the area of rights. This is where you will be able to find key information on political institutions. And here is where you will see which key international human rights treaties and conventions Zambia is a state party to. If you scroll down to the left, you will see where the latest event reports are. And most recently, we reported on Zambia's anti-corruption board being dismissed following corruption allegations. To read the full report, you click on Take a Closer Look. And you will see that we have coded negative on absence of corruption and predictable enforcement for this event. A few months earlier, we also had a report which we reported about the opposition politician being sentenced for defaming the president under a repealed law. In this case, we coded freedom of expression, a negative on freedom of expression. We also have a regional page if you would like to see a broader analysis at the regional level. This is for West Africa and West Asia. And we provide analysis on the emerging patterns based on each of the categories of the Global State of Democracy framework. And you can also see that we also have further analysis by interviews or blogs with external experts to provide deeper analysis. You can also see the number of reports we have reported in this region and the various aspects of democracy we have coded, and the list of critical events in the last 6 months. If you would like to do a more tailored research, you may go to the virtual archive. We can take more time in the breakout room, but I actually prepared already. If you're interested, for example, in how specific events have impacted the effectiveness of parliament in different countries, you can select effective parliament under representation under aspect of democracy. And I selected positive or negative coded reports. And you will see a list of events we have reported across the world. But we have been tracking, for example, Parliament's ability to investigate government's actions from certain countries, but also cases where parliamentary oversight had been undermined by specific processes, including by congressional impasses. But you can read more if you like to read the full analysis. And you can select to other filters. For example, if you want to understand what kind of events we have reported impacting access to justice in Africa, here I have selected the Africa region and access to justice, and you will see the kind of event we have reported. I hope I didn't take too long. This is the end of the presentation for Democracy Tracker, and I look forward to hearing from the participants.
Thank you very much, Atsuko. First of all, thank you for keeping the time, and I would like to also thank participants for being active in chat. We have a few comments here. We will shortly move to the practice session, practice lab room. We will spend 20 minutes in each of the room. However, I would like to mention that we will have recording of this session later published on YouTube, and we will also share materials from the workshop after the event takes place. So you'll have access to that. And if there are any immediate questions to Atsuko and Alex, feel free to either raise your hand or to put them in chat. I've seen that there is one comment put in chat earlier by Slobodan Martinovic, and I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, from Serbia. I don't know if you would like to mention it here in voice. Okay. If there are no immediate questions at this point, then perhaps I would like to ask my colleague Lauren to prepare the breakout rooms. I will very shortly run through how we would like to organize those. And then you will hear from moderators in each of the breakout rooms with more rules and more proposals for the discussions. So participants of the workshop will be assigned automatically in 3 breakout rooms dedicated to testing the presented tools. Each group work will be guided by an expert from International IDEA, Alex, Atsuko, and Mike. The practice lab will provide space to test the tools and gather feedback as to its applicability and effectiveness. You'll get a chance to ask questions to test those tools. We've come up with a few cases that might be helpful. And as Atsuko mentioned at the very beginning of her presentation, that you are also welcome to come up with different scenarios and cases that you would like to test with the tools online. That's also an option. So that's in short. I would also like to propose that once we are back in the main room, we'll have a very short discussion on how it went, how the work went in the breakout rooms. If you have any feedback, if there is a summary that you would like to provide based on your experience, that would be great. And now I hope, Lauren, that you can confirm that we can go to the breakout groups. And I think it's a yes. I think Alex's room is back here. We'll wait for the other 2 groups to come back. I guess most of us should be here now. Lauren, do let me know. Okay, so the 3 groups are back in here. I can see Atsuko, I can see Mike and Alex. So that means that all of us are in the main room now. I do hope that you had a chance to test the tools and perhaps to have a quick discussion. Can you hear me? Okay, someone can't hear me. Perhaps you should reset up the audio settings if that's the case. Otherwise, I would like to propose that each group has a very short summary from the work they did. I'm not sure if you had a chance to find a volunteer to do that, or if I should directly ask the moderators to play this key role. Alex, what do you think? How did it go in your room?
I mean, from my perspective, we had a good time. I can't answer for all the participants, but we explored the Georgia country profile, since that country's having an election soon. We looked at the searchable archive and some of the export and filter functions for the graphs.
That sounds very interesting. Anything that participants from your group would like to add? Okay, then I will ask if Mike could jump in with a brief summary.
Yes, thank you. We also had a look at the Georgia country profile, oddly enough. And we heard from the group that it could be useful for doing comparative cases between countries. That it was good that we had provided links. They found it generally well organized. Although we found that it was possible, because I know how to do it, to look up cases where there have been, say, innovations or improvements in a certain field of democracy overall. Perhaps we could have made that a little bit more clear, easier for the user to navigate. But yes, thank you. That was, if someone else in my group, I think we were cutting some people off just as we were ending, would like to hop in with something, we'd of course love to hear from you.
If anyone would like to add anything, feel free to do so. Any comments? Okay, Etsuko, how was it in your group? Did you also have a look at the Georgian case?
Yes, we did, but we actually have a volunteer, Johnny, who kindly volunteered to share what we have discussed or what we did.
Sure. Yeah, so hello everyone. Our group also looked at Georgia as well. And Asuka was very kind to give us a rundown and walkthrough of what indices we could use to gather information. So first was in the country profile, seeing that Georgia's faced significant declines recently in their freedom of expression and assembly. And then we were able to look at the significant events where we saw Parliament approved a controversial bill restricting LGBTQIA+ rights in September, and the Georgian Dream Party promising to ban opposition after elections in August 2024. I guess something interesting that we saw is that some significant events weren't necessarily categorized as being good or bad for democracy, but rather like kind of still developing. And then finally, we were able to look at the searchable archive, where we were looking specifically at LGBTQ+ rights, specifically looking in the European region, and we were reading updates in the Czech Republic, Sweden, Greece. And then finally, we looked at the Global State of Democracy Indices, where we specifically were looking at freedom of press, first in Asia, and then comparatively across all regions of the world. Yeah, it was very good. It was great.
Thank you so much, Johnny.
Thank you very much, Johnny. And Etsuko, anything you'd like to add from your perspective?
I think you went great, and we also have some questions about like how we collect sources for countries that may have like more limitations in terms of the variation of media outlets that can operate, and how we tackle this. And this was specifically on a country in the Western Asia region, which I thought was very relevant. So I basically responded saying that we try our best to balance the sources we use through the tools that we use to do our data collection, but we're also trying to enhance our sources continuously by in the future developing like more informal networks with locally based expert groups, which we can count on, so that we will have a more and more comprehensive analysis based on a more diverse sources going forward. But it was great. Thank you.
Thank you, Etsuko. It sounds like it was some fun. I did try to join some of the groups, so I captured a bit of discussions there. Are there any other comments from anyone in here?
Yulia, can I say just one thing, which is there have been lots of questions that I've noticed in the chat and also in some of the groups about how to get in touch with us if you have a question. And I just wanted to say that on the Democracy Tracker page at the bottom, there's a little box that says contact us, and you can use that. We do monitor that regularly, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. If you do have a question, don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you very much, Seema, for bringing this. Okay, so we're strict on time, and I would now like to invite you to the next item on agenda of our meeting in session, which is titled In Conversation, Understanding and Measuring the Roles of Parliament in Democracy. We will discuss the fundamental roles of parliaments in democratic governance and how they are currently incorporated within overall measures of democratic performance. We are joined here today for this session with amazing experts. You've heard from Jonathan Murphy, Head of Program at InterPares at the beginning of the workshop, and also from Giovanni Rizzoni, Head of the Parliamentary Support and Capacity Building Unit from the Italian Chamber of Deputies. And we'll also have the honor to hear from Shah, Head of Democracy Assessment Unit from International IDEA. So the conversation between experts will explore what are the implications when key pillars of parliamentary performance are not taken into account in democracy indicators, and the opportunities and challenges for a more holistic reflection of parliamentary work within measures of democratic performance. We really wanted to build the session as a conversation. So before I pass the floor to our experts for initial interventions, I would like to strongly encourage the audience to comment and to send questions in chat while we have this discussion. You're also welcome to use raise your hand option on Zoom and intervene during the discussion part, which will follow after the interventions. Now I'm delighted to pass the floor to Jonathan Murphy, who I know is a true believer in parliaments as core democratic institutions. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Julia, and thank you everybody again for being here today. And indeed, this is a topic that is close to my heart, that I'm passionate about. So no democracy exists without an effective parliament, and there's a close correlation between parliamentary effectiveness, democratic stability, and positive social and economic outcomes. And we have many years of research on this, including recently Roland Tusalem talking about parliaments and democratic stability, Darren Acemoglu talking about the social and economic the connection between strong parliaments and strong social and economic outcomes. The World Bank talking about the connection between effective democratic institutions and economic outcomes. However, there's a general tendency in international development and in democratic development circles to undervalue the role of parliaments as institutional pillars of democracy. And this is also reflected in a relative paucity of research in and data on parliamentary performance. Parliaments lie at the core of liberal democracy. They are the formal clearinghouse for national debate and decision-making. And I think it's very important to embed in our minds the fact that parliaments are the only formal institution where debate takes place, including all the different segments of society, all different perspectives of society elected to a parliament, and also where decision-making takes place following that debate. So parliaments vote the law, they hold the government to account, they vote the budget and monitor the budget, they represent citizens, and increasingly parliaments are responsible for more areas of work. For example, in many countries, independent oversight institutions such as human rights commissions report to Parliament, maybe selected by, certainly report to Parliament. However, conceptually, I think because parliaments have a role in so many of the different aspects of how democracy works, they're quite difficult to capture within models of democracy. And perhaps we can show the first slide now. And actually, I'm taking the slide that's already been shown before by the democracy assessment team, and you will see that I've put a little red around where parliaments are, and understandably, in the global state of democracy indices, parliaments find themselves under representation. But of course, parliaments play a key role also in participation. They play a key role in rule of law, because no law becomes law without being passed by parliament in democracies. And as I have already mentioned, they also play a key role in assuring rights. So in any kind of democratic model of democracy, there is a risk that parliaments are going to be put into one place. Otherwise, they have to be everywhere. Now, we can switch off the slide for now, and we'll go to the next slide later. Thanks, Lauren. So I think because parliaments tend in models of democracy to be presented as just one of numerous institutions, they tend to be put in a particular place, and then that leads to an under-collection of data on parliamentary performance within democratic measurement initiatives. So, for example, the Varieties of Democracy database, which is the most comprehensive measure of democratic performance across numerous dimensions, as an example, lacks any measure of Parliament's role and performance in the budgetary cycle, despite this being fundamental to governance performance, both in Parliament's role in ex-ante budget scrutiny and in ex-post audit. Further, Parliament's representation function is also inadequately covered in the VDEM data. Now, what are the implications of this conceptual underweighting? I argue that the implications are reflected in terms of resources that are committed to parliamentary strengthening by donors. So as parliaments don't appear, in my view, in a position within democratic models that is commensurate with their actual role and fundamental as a fundamental and irreplaceable pillar of democracy, I think it becomes easy for various reasons for donors to really limit support that is provided to international parliamentary strengthening. And maybe, Lauren, you can go to the second slide. See if I can see the slide at the same time. Yeah, the next slide, please.
Still the first one.
We need the next slide, if that's possible. So now if you're having... Okay, so these three slides, which we can show one after the other. I did an analysis last year of governance aid flows, and looking at a couple of databases. The first one was the International Aid Transparency Initiative. So I looked across all donors for the last 20 years. At funding that goes to international governance strengthening, and here you see this enormous preponderance of funding to strengthen the executive. So over three quarters of all the resources, so 140 billion. Between those, in those 20 years, went to government strengthening. We see relatively substantial amount of resources going to civil society strengthening, to justice, smaller amounts to decentralization and to elections, and a tiny amount, comparatively, of 0.9 billion going to parliaments and political parties. So over 150 times the resources that are provided to or over 150 times the amount that is provided to parliaments is provided to strengthening the executive. And when you think that a key role of parliament is to hold the executive to account, maybe that gives some indication of the problematic impact of this kind of imbalance. Maybe we go to the next slide. I think the slide sharing is maybe not working that well. Okay, great. So here, looking, I mean, this really repeats the previous slide, but because governance support to the executive was such an enormous chunk, I took that out, and then we see, even when we look at institutions, what we might call democratic, clearly democratic institutions as opposed to the executive, we still see a great preponderance of support going, the biggest chunk going to civil society and participation. On to the next slide, please. And I also, just to cross-reference the data, I studied data produced by the OECD, their DAC committee. And again, we see a huge amount of resources going to policy. They have different categories, but policy support is really support to the executive. We see 21% of support going there, 18% to legal and judicial, 18% to civil society and representation. And again, we go down to the bottom and 0.9% to parliaments and parties. Then to the final slide. We look at, there's some beautiful yellow arrows, but then they're not supposed to be in the presentation. So we look at support to parliaments and parties as an overall share of governance funding over the years between 2015 and 2020, which was the latest that there were full data. And we see, although there was a small increase as a proportion between 2015 to 2017, a very rapid decrease in support to parliaments and parties as an overall share of governance funding, down to 0.5% in 2020. So that's the end of my slides, and thank you very much. You can close the slides, and I will continue. So the reasons for this relatively weak presence of parliaments in funding is open to debate. And I'd like to suggest a few reasons. One is parliaments generally rank low in terms of public trust in institutions. Reasons are often associated with the conflictual nature of parliamentary debating, as well as this paradox of citizens' disappointment with those whom the citizen feels a right of control. So we elect parliamentarians, and they are directly responsible to us. Donors also often find parliaments difficult to work with, especially if the donor's ultimate goal is not necessarily to strengthen indigenous democratic institutions, but rather to promote particular values. And often mixed up with the desire to strengthen democracy is the desire for particular values to be introduced or to be implemented in particular countries. And parliamentary strengthening, which focuses on building the institution as opposed to promoting a particular policy agenda, often doesn't meet this direct desire to change specific policies. Parliaments, of course, reflect the votes of electors. They reflect the diversity of the electorate. Parliaments will usually have significant representations of perspectives that most development agencies will find objectionable. And it is much more comfortable to support civil society organizations in which the relationship is, even if indirectly, one of carrying out the policy agenda of the development agencies. And parliaments don't offer such a convenient conveyor belt of donor priorities. Indeed, by definition, if democracy is to mean anything, it's that decisions are made by elected representatives who may well not share the perspectives of donors. And I recall a phrase, a comment of Bertolt Brecht, the German writer, who after an uprising against the communist regime in East Germany said sarcastically that the government is very disappointed with the electorate. The electorate should be dissolved and replaced by another one. And unfortunately for donors, unfortunately for many of us, parliaments make decisions based on the will of the people that we may not agree with. But that is, in fact, at the core of democracy. So I would, coming back to the question of absence of evidence, absence of data on parliamentary performance, I see filling that gap as being an essential part of building an effective argument for parliamentary strengthening. And it requiring a much stronger understanding both of parliamentary performance and the connection between parliamentary performance and governance performance and overall human development indices. We are taking a few steps and with others to help fill that gap. Of course, there's the Interparliamentary Union's Indicators for Democratic Parliaments, which we participated in the development of this excellent tool covering 25 indicators, themselves divided into dimensions. The IPU indicators are designed for self-assessment. So at the moment, they're not usable as a comparative tool, but of course they provide the dimensions and the indicators that could be implemented, could be adapted to be used for an objective, a comparative tool. There are also efforts. The first of the really major attempts to assess parliamentary performance and parliamentary powers was the Parliamentary Powers Index by Stephen Fish and Matthew Kronig in 2009. Unfortunately, that has not been updated since 2009. Like any set of indicators, it has been critiqued. There have been some efforts to update that that tool, but the most important issue and most important barrier to development of comprehensive tools for measuring parliamentary performance is unfortunately financial. So, for example, to fill the gap in VDEM's measure of budgetary performance would involve either replicating the VDEM's approach independently, in other words, to collecting that data independently. VDEM declines to change its model to include this key dimension, and they're not here to explain why. Or alternatively, to port in data from another data set, for example, the Open Budget Index. But that again requires a significant amount of work to bring together two different types of data. So we at Inter-Pares are continuing to work on approaches to enhance the range and validity of parliamentary performance indicators, specifically with the goal of making a much stronger argument about how parliaments perform, the impact that they have on democratic performance overall and on the quality of life overall. All of your ideas and collaborations are really welcomed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, for such an interesting and a bit challenging speech. I think there were some of the questions there that you haven't underlined as questions, but a lot is for us to look for answers. So Seema, I would now like to pass the microphone, the virtual microphone to you, and we are looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you so much. So Jonathan actually said the entirety of the beginning of what I was going to say, which is that even though we place effective parliament under representation, we acknowledge and understand that, of course, the activities in parliament impact not just performance and quality of representation, but also rule of law, rights, and participation. And this is part of the challenge of having a quantitative data set. And it's one of the reasons why we have a qualitative data set, why we created the Democracy Tracker, because we have freedom there to go beyond what we have input indicators for in a way. So at the end of this year, we'll be publishing kind of updated concepts for the Democracy Tracker. And one of the things that you'll find there is that when we look at effective parliament in the Democracy Tracker, we're not just looking at oversight. We're also looking at the other things that parliament does and the other impacts that parliamentary activities have on democracy. So that, I hope, will help to mitigate some of it, some of the sort of, dissatisfaction with how parliament activity is measured in the long term. That provides a good opportunity to explain that in our quantitative data set, that Global State of Democracy Indices, we are limited in what we measure. So we have 5 source indicators or input sources for that feed the effective parliament factor under representation. And many of those have to do with the ability of parliament to exercise oversight of the executive and also to, question, investigate the executive. But we also look at the ability of opposition parties particularly to be able to do that and to publish, for example, a critical report of the governing party. And we also have an indicator there, which I think is really important, that looks at constraints on the executive that go beyond just a legislature. So let's say you're a country that's governed by a military junta. You're not necessarily democratic, but we do have an indicator that looks to see if there are military bodies that exercise some sort of check on the executive, or if there's, advisory council, the judiciary, other things that offer checks on executive power. But it's limited. That's what the quantitative data set looks at. The other thing that I wanted to say here is that there was a question in the agenda about the challenges of including more indicators. And, in theory, I don't think more indicators is a bad thing, as long as they're high quality, they cover all the countries you're looking to cover over the particular time period that you focus on. But I think when you do that in a quantitative data set, the danger is that you lose the nuance that comes with more data, with more indicators. So things don't necessarily operate in the same way in every same country, even if they're called the same thing. But in a quantitative data set, you have to reduce it to one thing that you're measuring, right, for each indicator. And so I think that's why it's always important to keep in mind that qualitative data is just as important as quantitative, and we need to put the two together to understand the context. And that's where I'll stop for now.
Thank you very much, Seema. I would like to now invite Giovanni to take the floor.
Thank you. I apologize for the interruption before. I don't know what happened. Apparently, everything worked perfectly, but the mysteries of the digital sphere. Well, thank you for the opportunity to comment the presentation by Jonathan. I make 3 comments of method about measuring the effectiveness of parliamentary functions. The first one is that when we speak about performance, necessarily the emphasis is on actions that are taken and outcomes of these actions. But it happens that some of the parliamentary functions are rather negative than positive. For instance, to delay a decision is can be a legitimate parliamentary decision by the majority or by the opposition. And also to represent political conflict can be very controversial, and usually it is evaluated in a negative way, for instance, by the press and by the media, whereas parliaments that represent the political conflict also in a very vocal way do exactly their job. And most of the times this job replaces the physical conflict in the streets. So I'm only raising the question of how can be difficult to really measure some of the fundamental functions of the parliament, especially when it comes to the negative ones rather than the positive ones. The second point is that, of course, Jonathan already touched this question, that the parliamentary functions relate to all the others, that is the oversight function with the legislative one in a circular way. So we have to adopt an holistic approach for measuring the performance of the parliament. And the third is that it's very difficult to evaluate these functions, the parliamentary function, in isolation without considering what the other institutions are doing. Other institutions, including, for instance, political parties, how political parties are organized, and how they are in contact with the society, how they transfer social demands to parliaments. So, of course, the political system, the system of the political parties really affect the way in which parliament act. And this is true also for governments. For instance, an effective oversight function of the parliament can be exercised only on the basis of data provided by the government, high quality data provided by the government. Without this data, it's very difficult to set up a well-functioning oversight function by the parliament. And my final point is about the funding by international donors for strengthening the parliament. I think that our work, your work, can be very helpful to introduce a change in the mindset of the international donors on the importance of parliaments. I make just one example. The great European strategy, the global gateway strategy, that is meant to strengthen the physical and also virtual infrastructures of many developing countries. Well, it would be very useful to strengthen also the capacity of the parliaments to oversight, to scrutiny how the European funds are really spent and invested. Since the European Union cannot set up a huge control system on the individual countries, it would be much better to devote a part of these funds to strengthening the oversight capacity of the national parliaments on how these funds are used and invested, also in an anti-corruption perspective. So this is only one example on how strengthening parliament can also lead to strengthening the good governance of a country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Giovanni, for an excellent presentation and 3 very important comments. I was thinking that I would like to propose that Jonathan.Seema, if you have any initial comments on each other's interventions, that would be very much welcome.
Well, I agreed with everything that Seema and Giovanni said, so I thought they were excellent complementary points. Giovanni's comment about the global gateway is a very interesting and important one, and I hope that we will be able to work together on looking at how parliaments, national parliaments can exercise oversight. He makes a very good point. And Seema's point about the importance of qualitative data, definitely take that and agree with that.
Thank you so much. Seema, anything to add?
Yeah, just hello. I just want to add something. I'm from Libyan Parliament, and concerning EU technical assistance, I think also European Union should evaluate its technical assistance concerning democracy transformation in other countries. We notice here in Libya, for example, that European resources could be spent in a better way. So maybe I brought this issue, but this is very important comment for my European colleague to put in consideration. Thank you a lot.
Thank you very much. And I'll just like to encourage everyone to speak freely. This is a community of practice where it's all about people, networking, and freedom in what we talk about. And maybe something else I would like to add is, and it is that to remind you that actually Agora community of practice, parliamentary development community of practice, was launched with one of the goals to make sure that we talk about these issues and that we make sure that parliaments are at the center and the heart of democracy, and that everyone, all of the engaged stakeholders do realize the fact how important it is. Any other questions or comments from the audience?
I have a question, Yulia, for Jonathan and Giovanni, or actually any member of the audience. I was wondering, given the focus these days on more participatory models of democracy, whether you see any trend in the parliaments that you work in or with for more initiatives of this kind, whether that's sortition, which is, I think, at one kind of extreme, all the way to just smaller exercises that include constituents in a more proactive way, and sort of where you see that going.
Shall I start and then hand to Giovanni? So in terms of parliaments engaging in more advanced and more innovative approaches to citizen engagement, there are a lot of examples of parliaments launching, for example, citizens' assemblies to provide input or even to make decisions on important issues or to make recommendations that go into Parliament. And I personally am very positive about combining the value, the merits of citizens' assemblies and other methods of citizen consultation into parliamentary work. I also know that Giovanni addressed this issue in his book, and I'm sure that he will add more detail and more sophistication to what I have to say. Giovanni.
Jonathan, you are right in saying that there are many experiments on the way by many really parliaments in the world, I would say, and combining participatory democracy with representative democracy. The citizens' assembly is one example, but for instance also e-petitions, the direct consultation of the committees with the public. And so what is going on is opening the traditional closed structure of parliamentary representation to more participatory channels with the citizens, because I think that the question at the horizon is that the political parties are no more able to transmit the social demands to the parliaments effectively as they were in the past, as they were a mass organization deeply rooted in society. And so parliaments should and must have new sensors in the society capable of detecting new demands and new issues. I used to say that parliaments have to find a new balance between knowledge and common sense, the common sense of the citizens. Not only the experts should and must be heard in order to make evidence-based legislation, but also common citizens, because they have implicit knowledge that can be very useful and should be combined with the specialist knowledge that can be given to the parliaments by experts, by professors, by stakeholders, and so on. So this is really a perspective completely open, and I think the most innovative one for parliamentary procedures all over the world.
Thank you very much, Giovanni. And there's a comment in chat from our colleague, Venlin Bochev, who once coordinated Agora portal. So he's my colleague in a sense. I don't know, Venlin, if you would maybe like to take the floor and to voice it, perhaps. I think we can't hear you. Maybe that's the headset.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. So just to briefly state this, since Agora I've been working as a researcher and PhD candidate on the role of parliaments in countering democratic backsliding. I do this in the context of Southeast Europe, but I've had the opportunity to engage also with other data, and I would stress that VDEM and other indices do not cover sufficiently the lawmaking process. And I would also say that, for example, EU progress reports, etc., they only look at certain aspects of the legislative process. And yet, if we look at these global, let's say, infamous cases of backsliding, I don't want to cite the name of a lot of countries, but there is a very good correlation between non-inclusive lawmaking process and the occurrence of democratic backsliding. And I do think there is not so much, let's say, bigger, wider data in relation to this. And I do understand that it's very hard to, it's very labor intense to look at the various aspects of the lawmaking process and monitor them in detail, but I do feel this has to be problematized. So this is the only thing I wanted to say. Sorry for what could be perhaps perceived as a small rant, but I think it's it adds to Jonathan's point as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks a million, Venelin, for bringing the comment into the conversation. I wonder if there are any other questions coming from the audience. You can either raise your hand, put it in chat, whatever you prefer. If not, maybe I will suggest that we have a final round of comments from the speakers of this session, and then we can wrap up this wonderful and very interesting discussion.
I made my final comment, so over to Seema and Giovanni.
Me too. I don't have anything to add at this point.
Thank you so much. Giovanni, anything to add?
No, I think of course, there would be a lot of things to comment and to develop, but I hope that we have the opportunity of new meetings like this that I found very useful.
Thank you very much. I only have, I'm only left with a big thank you note for everyone. First of all, to the speakers of the workshop, Jonathan, Seema, Giovanni, Atsuko, Alex, Mike, thank you so much for your support and for making this event.
Julia, we have one additional question in chat.
Okay, apologies.
No problem. I have a concern about the limitation part of the measuring system. I'm also interested to find out whether the system will work well in the SADC continent in a country where one political party is dominant.
I can answer in terms of the indices and the tracker. Yes, it works in the SADC continent for sure. I believe we cover all SADC countries in our data. So I don't see that you would face any problems there. But if you have any specific questions on the tools and the countries in the SADC region, please reach out. I'm happy to talk more.
I think I'm definitely, of course, agree with what Seema said about the availability of data across the world, including in Southern Africa. I would say, though, that that sometimes it is difficult to use the same measures in countries at very different levels of economic development. And I looked at some research recently looking at parliamentary performance that did identify some difficulties in transferring the similar types of indicators from very resource rich environments to resource poor environments. So I think that any kind of global indicators need to take into account national specificities. So I think you raise a good question, and when indicators are designed, and I'm not pointing at Seema and her team at all, at making a general point, it is very important that indicators are designed including how those data are both relevant to different environments within the world, and also whether those data can be collected, because a big problem in collecting data outside resource-rich countries is that often those data are not actually collected at all, and therefore you have a risk of kind of reproducing this sort of north-south divide in terms of what's happening in the global south being underrepresented. But so it's a great question. I know that the democracy assessment team, the DA team, works very, very hard on that. In general, I think it's a question that we need to look at very carefully. Does this work for all the different, if we want to apply it globally, does it work in all different environments?
I just want to add to that I hear you 100% agree with you. We try very hard in the tracker, especially, to take context into account. So when you see an event report in the tracker, you see it in the context of the country profile page, which tells you how that country got to where it is. And we're not assessing that event against events in other countries. It's only assessed against that own country, that one country's performance. So things that matter a lot to a democracy in one place won't matter as much in another place. And we try and emphasize that point. And I think that's one of the reasons the tracker has unique value.
Mm-hmm. Giovanni, did you want to talk about that? The sort of relevance across different environments of indicators of measuring performance?
Well, this is a crucial question, of course, because you have to take into account the institutional environment, as I tried to say before, and but I'm really aware of what was said before. That is, when it comes to qualitative data, it's very difficult to set standards to measure the quality instead of. It's much easier to measure the quantity of laws, the quantity of oversight actions taken by parliaments, but when it comes to the quality of these activities, well, we have a serious problem of comparing the different contexts and different situations. But I think that it's worthwhile all the same, the exercise, even if it is necessarily imperfect. So this is a platform for exchange and a comparison. I think without having the claim of a scientific assessment that I don't think fits with the quality of democracy.
Thank you very much, Giovanni. Thank you, Jonathan and Seema, for wonderful comments and very insightful discussion, which I think was also appreciated by participants of the workshop, and they've indicated that in chat. And I would like to thank all of the participants of the workshop for being here, for finding time, day or night or morning. I know it's a bit complicated sometimes to meet different time zones, but we do our best. I just want to mention that we'll keep in touch. We'll reach out to you after this workshop. We'll share materials from the discussions. If you have any questions or proposals as to the work of the community of practice, and also those related to the work of International IDEA, you've got contacts in chat, and we'll also include them in the final email. So you can contact our colleagues directly and see how you can cooperate, coordinate. So yes, that's, I think, should be it from me. Have a good rest of the day. And I do hope to meet you soon again on during the next meetings of the Agora Parliamentary Development Community of Practice.